when they have to when they have to find a school for the child. So when it comes to choosing a school for special needs children, it becomes even more vital that they have to search through a lot of criteria before possibly identifying a school. And I mean, it's a very important factor, as well as the kids spend a lot of hours in schools, especially in these education facilities. So it's incredibly important that their experience is enjoyable and informative as well. So we have been working with a lot of schools over the last few years, especially in terms of supporting them in the inclusion process. And Dr. Bindiya has about 14 years of experience in terms of working with several schools in both India and US, as well as consulting on several inclusion projects in schools as well as outside. So we thought, why don't we get her and probably share her perspectives on, if a parent is searching for the school, what are some of the things that they can have keep in mind while identifying the right school. Just a little bit of what Insight does. So Insight basically supports children in inclusion in both classroom and at home care. So we do work with a lot of schools in terms of providing them shadow teachers, providing therapists at home for both behavior therapy as well as special education. We also have an online platform where we do online class in special education as well as do child counseling. Um, so we have worked with about 20 plus schools in Bangalore in terms of providing them with shadow teachers or supporting them in the inclusion process. So the parent company of Insight, we have pre-incubated RT Lab is India's only disability-focused accelerator. We are part of MIT Social Entrepreneurship Program, as well as, this program is also supported by All Inclusive Foundation. So I hand over, and before I just formally welcome Dr. Bindiya. So she has done a PhD in school psychology from North Carolina State University. She has also done a master's in special education from NCCU. She's also certified in collaborative and practice solutions approach as well as in teach. Um, she holds a special diploma in child rights law from the National Law School of India University. She was a member of Karnataka Child Welfare Committee. Was also part of several schools and part of several school bodies in terms of implementing inclusion. And presently, she's working with both Insight as well as All Inclusive Foundation. Over to you, Vindhya.
Thank you, Mithun. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here today for this session. Before we start, I would like to say that when we talk about children with specialized learning needs, we are talking about a huge population. I mean, there are a lot of different kinds of special needs that we look at. I want to make it clear that before we start, this particular session would probably be targeting mostly families who have children with learning differences. Like, say, for example, a cognitive kind of a disability, learning differences caused by some cognitive difficulties, or learning differences caused by some socio-emotional difficulties like behavioral or emotional regulation issues. They're not able to stay still or sit in a seat, or they want to walk around while in class. Those kinds of behavior regulation difficulties. So it is more about, or it could be academic difficulties where children have learning disabilities, specific learning disabilities, and they're having difficulty accessing the curriculum like others do. So this presentation might not be talking a lot about, say, children with physical disabilities, children with visual impairment or hearing impairment. But if you are here to attend this presentation, and if you have questions, please do feel free to ask the questions after this presentation. And I will be happy to answer the questions to the best of my knowledge. Having said that, let's start with today's session. Today, we will be talking a little bit about the state of inclusion in schools in India, in particular in Bangalore, because that is what I have most experience with. But we could also probably talk about other states in India, where if we have participants from those states, and if they can also share about what the current situation in those schools, that would also be helpful for the participants I'm sure. Once we look at the state of inclusion, we also want to understand as a parent, as a family, as a caregiver, what is it that you're expecting from schooling for your child? I think it is important to be clear on that before we try to identify a school or even decide to put your child in conventional schooling. Then we will also look at what are some of the specific things that you can look at in a school um, during admission time, because at admission time there's a limited amount of information that you have access to. It's probably whatever the school will claim to offer or whatever their websites would say, or maybe even ask reference from other families who have gone to that school. But after the admission is when you get to know a lot more about the school and if the school is a right fit for your child. So we will look at some of the things that you might want to look at each of these different stages. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about inclusion and let's understand what inclusion is before we go into our presentation for the day. I'm sure you must have seen this visual at some point. Now, if you look here, these are different ways of how we include our marginalized communities in the mainstream systems. So you see here, exclusion is one way of doing it, where we keep all our marginalized communities. It could be anyone for that matter. It could be our children with disabilities or individuals with disabilities. It could be individuals who identify as gender minorities. It could be individuals who are from a different socioeconomic background. It could be any groups. How do we treat them in different communities or in different societies is what is being depicted in this visual. So exclusion is where they're completely kept away. They are not even brought into the mainstream system in any way or form. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I think it was just a glitch.
Then there is also another way of doing it where we do segregation. So we do accept them, or we do acknowledge their presence in the society, but we deal with them. We're not willing to tolerate them within in our presence, so we keep them separately within our society and we cater to them. Then there is a model called integration, where you bring them into the society, but again, there is some sort of a separation that you create from the mainstream population for this population. So like, say, for example, exclusion would be if your children with disabilities are completely kept at home and schools do not let them come in, you can just keep them at home and take care of them. That would be exclusion. There is no facility for your child to come out and go to school, for example. Now, what would segregation mean? Segregation could mean that, you have a school that it's a regular school which has a self-contained classroom where the children with special needs can go to. But it is within the school, but it is a separate setting. So that could be an example of segregation. Now, what would integration mean? Integration would be that the child is in the regular classroom, but has, say, a shadow teacher to sit with it. That would be integration, right? Even though the child is within the classroom, there is some kind of specialized intervention given only to that child, which is obvious to the rest of them. So we are including them, but with specific other supports, which are obviously exclusionary. Okay. So the inclusion that you see on top, the visual, that is like an ideal that we want to get to. And having worked with many schools, I don't think any of our schools or any of the systems, like I've worked with schools in the US and I've worked with schools in India, I have not seen inclusion happening in this sense that we are seeing on top. So right now, I would say our schools, especially schools in Bangalore that I have experience with, are probably at a segregation or an integration. So that is something we need to understand even before we start looking for schools and we're thinking about including our child in a school. Okay. The next visual I want to show you is just like we know that most of the disabilities do happen to come on a spectrum. Like when you talk about autism, it is a spectrum. When you talk about ADHD, it is a spectrum. Even though a child is identified or diagnosed with a condition, doesn't mean that the child's difficulties are going to be same as the second child who's diagnosed with the same condition. Their levels of impairment or their levels of need would differ. So we will have to assess each child and understand what is that child's level of need and cater to that child in particular. So that is why we have individualized education plans to cater to the needs of each child differently. Now, when our children with special learning needs, specialized learning needs come on a spectrum, then why wouldn't our services be provided on a spectrum? When we talk about a lot of schools who claim to be inclusive, at least here in Bangalore, we see that there may be schools that have adopted this way of, okay, we will give you admission and your child will be placed in the regular classroom, but you have to provide a shadow teacher for this child. That is our model. So any child who comes through the doors of that school, no matter what the child's need is, will be fit into that model. Now, there may be a second school that says that, oh, well, we do inclusion. We have a special ed classroom. We have a SEND room, that as they call it. We will put your child in there and there will be special educators to teach them. They will not be coming to the regular classroom. They will be in that classroom all the time. And that is how we will cater to your needs. So now any child who goes into the school will be put in that setting. So what is happening here is that inclusion is looked at as a one size fits all. And that is not going to work for every child. It is going to be different for each child. So we need to have a spectrum of services also being provided at these schools in order to cater to the needs of these children, right? So what does this spectrum look like? Now, if you look at this visual here, like at the left end of the inclusion spectrum is complete inclusion, where a child is in a regular classroom and is sitting there even without a shadow teacher, and the teachers or the resources that are available in that classroom for every child are the resources that are being used for this child also. And this child accesses the curriculum that is being taught in the class for everybody. So this child fully accesses all the materials, curriculum, resources, everything, just like everybody else in that classroom. So that would be full inclusion in a regular classroom. A second way of doing it would be you are included in the regular classroom, but we have this support teacher who will be there with you and who will support you throughout the day and will help you with whatever it is that you need help with. Then there is a third level where the child remains in the regular classroom most of the time. So say, for example, the child has a learning disability, specific learning disability in math. The child will be in the regular classroom for all the other subjects, but when it is time for math, the child will be pulled out into a resource room or a special education room where the child is given additional stimulation for math. And after that period is over, the child comes back to the inclusion classroom and is there for the rest of the day. So they're being pulled out intermittently for certain subjects or for certain areas where the child is struggling. But for all other purposes, the child is part of the regular inclusion classroom. Now, there could be a fourth type where the child is placed in a special education classroom primarily, but is pushed in to the regular classroom every time for all the areas of development that the child may be able to fit in the regular classroom. Say, for example, a child who is academically struggling but is socially equipped to function in a regular school. So you might keep the child for all the academic activities in the special ed classroom, but every time there is lunch, physical education, drama, music, dance, all those kinds of things, you will send them back to the regular classroom. So it is a reverse of the third one that we spoke about. So we call it a push-in service. Then there is this special ed classroom that is the primary placement for this child. This child stays in the special ed classroom all the time, does not have any interaction with the regular education classroom or with the students in the regular education classroom. So they are in this specifically segregated section that is meant for them. Then of course we have our special schools, which are not even part of the regular schools. Now, whatever we just spoke about up until now are part of your regular education system, or it's part of your regular schools. But a special school would be something that is completely different. That would be only for children with special needs, and they would be catered to in a different way, and they will have different curriculum, different type of teachers, and different way of teaching, a lot of other resources, more specialized resources. And again, there the child will have access to only other children with special needs, but not with the regular mainstream population. And then, of course, then there is also there also a provision where you keep the child at home and the child is homeschooled and does not have access to any schooling format, as in, does not go to any community schooling format. They are being taught at home. So the spectrum can spread. You can have a lot more things that you can add into, in between the spectrum, but this is a kind of a rudimentary breakup of how an inclusion spectrum could look like. So now let's talk about when you're looking for a school in general. What should be your expectations for the child in general? It is not even about what the school should be, or it is not even about what should be taught there, or it is not about the specific. It's about in general. What is it that you're looking for your child from a school? Okay. Now, most of us, because we are so used to the conventional system of schooling, and we've all grown up in our very colonial structured education system, we all know there is one goal for schooling, that is making good grades, getting, passing your 10th with really good marks, or passing your 12th with really good marks, and making it into a good college. That is our only aim for school. Now, that is the aim for everyone, because that is the conventional aim for everyone. So as a family or as a caregiver of a child with special needs, that is the only aim we know of. And that is the aim we also have when we are looking for a school for our child. But what I want to do, what I would like for you to do is to think a little differently when it comes to thinking about schooling for your child. What should be the goals for your child from schooling? Just excuse me, somebody's trying to reach me. Sorry about that. When we look for school for a child, or when we're thinking about schooling for a child with special needs, to me, it is about inclusion. It is about having that child be a part of the mainstream society. Because school is like the is a microcosm of the society, right? Like you have everybody you would see in a society in a school. I mean, they're representation of everybody you would see in a mainstream society in a school. So it is important for this child to be part of the society, and it is also important for the society to be able to coexist with this child, right? So for me, that is what the goal of inclusion is. And for a child with special needs, that is the more important goal when you're going into a regular education school. Academic progress should not necessarily be a goal. Now, I wouldn't say it shouldn't be a goal at all, because there may be some children who do extremely well with academics. But what happens is most of the time, we are so obsessed with academic progress that we tend to lose sight of other more important goals for our child. Like, for example, communication. I believe that communication should come first, even before academics. I feel like children who have not gone to school for 14 or 15 years of their life, you just have to teach them how to read and how to do some basic math, and they will be able to get through whatever it is that they can do later on. Even a 10th exam for that matter, they can crack with basic reading comprehension. So even if they have not done whatever it is that third grade expects them to do, or a fifth grade expects them to do, or a seventh grade expects them to do, they would still be able to crack a 10th grade exam to get a 10th grade degree. So the academic milestones that we look at in each of those grades, or what they should be achieving, what they should be learning, is not necessarily important for our children, but rather they should be able to have the life skills needed. Maybe, come back home and tell you what happened at school, for example, or to be able to go and tell the teacher that I'm not able to do this homework, for example, or some basic things that we usually take for granted. To tell the teacher that I'm not able to sit and listen to your class. Can I please go outside and take a walk? So these are the skills that are more important for our children's well-being while they are included in a regular school. So communication, extremely important. We have a lot of children who are, especially on the autism spectrum, who do not develop their skills of speaking until very later in life. So I see a lot of families who emphasize academics and not really pay attention to their to a more consistent and sustainable mode of communication for these children, that they tend to struggle when they get to their teenage years, when there's so much more that they have to share about whatever they are going through, and they're unable to do that. And that becomes a struggle for these families because they did not manage to find an appropriate mode of communication for their child. When our parents, for example, used to go look for a school, they look for a school that is going to get you from kindergarten through 12th. And I think we still do that for our children who are neurotypically developing. We usually look for a school. Okay, I put him in kindergarten. I want him to be there till 12th. This is a good school, so this is where I want them to go. So let me get in kindergarten itself so that they can be there until 12th grade. For our children, I think I don't think such kind of a sense of commitment is necessary. We need to keep our options open, because we don't know if the school is going to necessarily work for this child. We need to figure it out. Let the child go, let the child experience school for a year or two, and in the meantime you can also understand how the teachers are accepting this child, how the teachers are responding to this child, what is a general climate for inclusion in that school. And if you feel like my child doesn't fit in here, so be it, you find another school. I know of a lot of families who have done that. They may have gone to a completely regular school and been in inclusion classroom up until 10 years of age, and then decided that this is not working out, and gone into a smaller school where there is a lot more attention and maybe a special education support, and then done 2 or 3 years there, and then moved into an alternative form of schooling like an NIOS. There are a lot of possibilities. It doesn't have to be that you find the school where your child will stay until he or she graduates grade 12. So don't think about committing to a school. Just be open to exploring. If this school doesn't work, we will try and figure out which would be the other school that works. Also remember that in this day, conventional schooling is not the only option. In fact, we have a lot of families who are opting for non-conventional or alternative ways of schooling children. Homeschooling is one of them. There are children who are going to small community type schools where there is less of an emphasis on academics, but more emphasis on life skills, for example. There are children who are being completely unschooled. They stay at home, do not do any schooling until 14 or 15 years of age, until they realize what they want to do with their life, and then probably go and complete an NIOS degree. So there are a lot of options for us right now in this day and age. So conventional schooling is not the only option. So we don't have to just think in those terms. You can always keep your options open and explore other ideas also. There is no best school. I believe that a school is as good as its principal and a classroom is as good as its teacher. So if your child may be going to the best reviewed or best school in town, but if your child's teacher does not adhere to the philosophy of that school, or the child's teacher is not the best teacher that the child can have that year for that child is lost. So a classroom is only as good as the teacher who teaches in that classroom. So don't go by the best school, and every school can be different. So you may even have other families who have taken their children to a particular school and enjoyed it or have had success there, might recommend that the school works, the school is a good school, why don't you try it there? Now it is not necessary that that school would work for your child. May have worked for that child but may not work for your child. And this is true for therapists also. I get questions like, who's a good speech therapist in town, or who's a good occupational therapist in town, and I give them a lot of options, and I tell them, see, you figure it out. You need to find your match, because this may be a really good speech therapist as per the reviews, but that doesn't mean that it will be a good speech therapist for your child. So you find that best fit. Keep your options open, keep your minds open, and explore more. Okay, now moving on to choosing a school. What are some of the things that we can look at when we are choosing a school? One is we can definitely get more information on the infrastructure. So when I say infrastructure, it is about the size of the classroom, for example. I have seen some schools which have huge classrooms, and in that huge classroom, only a part of the classroom is dedicated to a seating arrangement that is typically seen in a classroom, where you have desks and benches. But then there's another half of the classroom that is left open or vacant. This usually works with children who have behavioral and behavior regulation difficulties, who cannot sit in a place for a long time. It helps for them to just get up and walk around in that area while the teacher is still teaching the class, but not really disturbing the rest of the classroom. Now, this is a luxury in this day and time. Most schools are trying to capitalize on how many more classrooms they can create in the given space. So this is a luxury. This is not something you would find, but in a lot of schools. The other thing that you could look for is access to playground. How big is a playground? Is there a playground with a lot of play equipment? Is there a running track? Is there a field where they can go run? I mean, these are all things that would probably help a child to take a break um, from a very constraining environment like a classroom, and go out, run around, climb a monkey bar, or kind of calm himself down and come back to the classroom. So when I say infrastructure, those are the things that I'm referring to. What all do the child have access to if he needs to take a break from this regular classroom room? I would also recommend smaller schools and smaller classes. There are a lot of schools in cities like Bangalore, which are startup schools. They may be probably starting up in a say, for they might rent a house, for example, or a mansion, and they would start up a school there. These would be really small schools, and the advantage of a small school is that all the teachers, all the adults in the building would know your child, and there is this very personal interaction, personal touch that comes with it, and your child is also not lost in the crowd. Like, say for example, if you go to a large school, um, large schools are, that are usually pretty popular in the town. Those may be schools with a class size of 45 to 50 in each section, with like sections from A to O in a given grade. Those are places where your child can easily get lost. I mean, nobody would even know that he exists there, because how is a teacher going to be able to pay attention to every child's need in a 1:45 ratio classroom? So I would recommend a school that is smaller in size with smaller classrooms. That would be ideal for our kids. The school's attitude and approach towards inclusion. Now, this is something you will have to figure out from whatever the material they have out there, literature that they have out there about the school, and also by talking to people who are connected with the school. So maybe talking to the principal, the teachers, the admin staff, other parents other families who have been sending their children there. This is the only way you can understand what is the culture, inclusion culture in that school. So that is one thing that it would be good for you to kind of get some information on before you decide on a school. Then definitely the services offered. Is there a special education teacher? Is there a counselor or any other mental health professional? Are there therapies being provided in the school, etc., etc.? What are the other services that are there for children with different learning needs? It would also be helpful to understand what are the different types of children with special needs who are being served there. Are there children with mostly cognitive difficulties, or mostly academic difficulties, or are there children with socio-emotional difficulties? Just to know that if these children are there, then the teachers have probably had the experience in working with them. So which would probably be helpful for your child if you know that there is somebody similar to your child who's already attending that school. Another thing to look for is what is the nature of their intake assessment. I know of a lot of children with autism who struggle with something like this. They may be really smart, they may know their stuff, but they may not be able to put it down on a paper to to convince the school that I'm really good and I am fit to come to this school. So that intake assessment might not be the right assessment for this child. Now, does that mean this child will not get an admission into that school? That is the question you need to ask. If this child is given this assessment, are they giving some accommodations in that assessment? Are they giving some leeway? Or are they completely exempting the child from this assessment and using some other way of assessing? Say, for example, the school where I consult as an inclusion consultant, when there is a new family who comes in for admission, typically they start talking to me. If the administration realizes that there is a specialized learning need for this child, or if the family discloses that there is a specialized learning need, they're referred to me and I have a conversation with this family. And in this conversation, I give them information on all these points that are put on this slide. I tell them about what our approach to inclusion is, what are the kinds of children that we have currently being served, what are the different types of services offered, and what are the different types of classroom arrangements, what are the different, as I showed you earlier in inclusion spectrum, what are the different types of classes that are there to serve these children. All this is usually talked to them, is given to them in that orientation session before even they can make a decision. And also an intake assessment, an informal one, is done where I have a discussion with the child, I talk to the child, I observe the child, I look at whatever the child's work from previous school is like. So I do a lot of information gathering by looking at portfolio or by looking at how the child is behaving while in the session, all that. So it is not a paper pencil test that I give the child. So from there, I gather some information to see if this child would fit into the school and if this child can be served appropriately by the resources that we have if this child were to come to the school. Now, once you are in the school, what are some of the criteria that you would, or what are some of the what are some things that you would look for in the school? One is how are the teachers dealing, or what is the teacher's approach to your child? I know of teachers who are only worried about completing the portions for the semester and would not appreciate any kind of hindrance to that goal of theirs. If there is a child who would disturb her class and distract the rest of the class while she is teaching, and she has to interrupt her teaching to go and cater to this child's needs, she would rather not have that child in the classroom. I've interacted with a lot of teachers like that. I don't want this child in the classroom because my class is being interrupted constantly and I'm not able to complete my portion. I just want this child out of the class so that I can finish my portion. Now, I've also worked with teachers who have had children who are highly active in their class, and they did not know how to work with this child, and they did not know how to help this child. And they've come to me, and I have given them strategies like, you know what, I want you to make a connection with this child. Spend as much time with this child as possible. Talk to this child every morning. Spend time with him. Take a walk with him. Understand what's going on in his family, what he did that morning. You should know everything about this child. And once you have made that connect, you can see how differently this child would behave in your classroom. And I have had teachers who have gone that length to do that, to support a child in the classroom. So you would get both kinds, you know. So these are things that you would understand only when your child starts going to that school. So understanding what is the general teacher attitude there, is it consistent with inclusion policies of that school, would be helpful. And that you would know as your child comes home and tells you stories, or as you go for PTM meetings and talk to these teachers, and the kind of complaints or concerns as the teachers are bringing up, you will get an idea of the teacher attitudes through these interactions. What is the expectations from the child? If there's a child in the classroom who has a learning difficulty, is not able to cope with the curriculum like everybody else in the class, but the teacher insists that this child has to do the exact same amount of work that is being done by everybody else in the class, that might not be an appropriate expectation for the child, and that might not be a right setting for the child. You may even have a send room. Now, if the child is struggling, sometimes a child who has a specialized, like a specific learning disability in math, for example, is studying in grade 5, but his math level is only at a second grade level. So ideally, what you have to do is you have to start with the second grade level and bridge the gap between 5th grade and second grade for this child before this child can start coping with the 5th grade curriculum. So what a special education teacher is supposed to do is to start working with him at a grade 2 math, not grade 5 math. But I know of a lot of special education rooms in these inclusive schools that work on making sure that this child does 5th grade level maths by bringing them into the special education room. Now that beats the purpose. Then there is no point in calling it the special education room, right? Because you're basically just trying to tutor the child. It's just like sending the child for tuition. So these are the things that you need to understand. How much is the school or the teachers able to accommodate for the child, make room for the child, give exemptions for the child? How much are they taking into consideration the level of the child's level of functioning, and what is the appropriate expectation from the child? How much are these teachers considering all these factors when serving the child? Availability of accommodations. So we know a lot of these boards like CBSE, NIOS, they all have a lot of accommodations that they offer for children who have specialized learning needs when they come to write a 10th board or a 12th board exam. Like say, for example, if you have difficulty with writing, we would offer the facility of a scribe, or you would be given additional time on the test, or you would be given a quiet room to sit and test in. There are a lot of different, even I think CBSE had even started typing your answers on a computer instead of writing it. So these are all accommodations. A lot of the boards have made provisions for our children. But we do see that despite the boards offering these provisions, a lot of schools are not aware of these provisions. And the schools insist that the children do the exams like everybody else. So when a board is able to give that, what is preventing a school that is affiliated to that board from giving these accommodations to the child throughout grade school? So if there is a child who, one of my most favorite examples that I quote a lot is a child who has difficulty with writing, has a specific learning disability in writing, has difficulty with writing, and you're trying to test this child's knowledge of science. You give the question paper to the child and you ask the child to write your answers, this child may flunk that exam. On the other hand, if you were to orally ask the questions to the child will give you the most brilliant answers and might score higher than anybody else in the class. Now, the problem there is when you're making the child write, you are not assessing the child's knowledge of science, you are assessing the child's ability to write. So instead of having the child write, why don't you ask the child orally and have the teacher write down the answers verbatim as the child will give it to you, and then score the child on what you have written down from the child's oral response. Now that would be an appropriate accommodation for this child, because then you are actually looking at how much science does this child know. So those are the accommodations that can be made available to children right from the beginning, so that they can be trained in such a way that they're ready to take the 10th exam in a similar manner when they get to that point. Continued support for children. We see that a lot of schools refuse to give these accommodations right from the beginning because they think that, oh, how can we give all this? Because eventually they have to write the board exams. How are they going to do that? How can we write the answers for them? Well, they do that in 10th board. They do have scribes writing answers for them. So you can orally deliver your answer and the scribe will write it for them. So those accommodations are available. So why don't you give those supports right from the beginning? Now, there are also schools that would sit down and talk to you about, say, for example, the child reaches 8th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, or 9th grade for that matter. Now, this is where your child is at, and this is what a CBSE board or an ICSE board would expect from you, from the child, as far as performance on examination is concerned. Do you think your child is ready for it? Or can we sit and discuss about if this is the right exam for your child? Do we have to think about alternative forms of testing the child? Do we have to think about alternative exams for the child? Now, this is a discussion that they constantly have with the family in different points, in different junctures of the child's development. So 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, we have these constant connect with these families, and we reevaluate the child's current status and see this is the appropriate placement for the child. Do we have to think about other sorts of placement? Do we have to think about other ways of assessing the child? Do we have to think about alternative boards for the child? So the school has to be able to give you that support throughout grade school. It's not just right in the beginning or not just right at the end, but somebody who can give you that support throughout the grades. So that is one of the things that you might want to look for when your child is in a school. And if you feel like the options that they're providing does not match your child's need, you can always look for another school that would provide the options that meet the child's. So these are some quick points. This was a very quick review of some information that I thought would be helpful to share. I would like for this session to be a more interactive session. So I just put forth some information that I would like to share, but I would like to open it up for discussion so that you can ask me specific questions that you have, and I would be happy to answer it to the best of my knowledge. If there are other professionals or parents or other people who've had experience with inclusion and going to schools and working with professionals there, please feel free to jump in and respond to questions that if you think you can do a better job than I do.
There's a question in the chat, ma'am.
Okay.
Do schools encourage use of AAC in the classrooms? That's one question. I don't know. There's a follow-up question. Okay, the same person. My 4-year-old is minimally verbal and uses AWAS for communication. So that's a basic question.
Okay.
Does school encourage AAC?
Now, when we talk about AAC, I don't think a lot of schools are aware of AAC and the provisions that AAC offers. And I think the reason being that we have a lot of resistance from families themselves in using AAC, that we don't have enough users of AAC to push for something like this in schools. In fact, as a part of the organization, as a part of the work that our organization does, our organization is called All Inclusive Foundation, and we try to do a lot of advocacy work and support work for individuals from marginalized backgrounds. And one of the things that we have been considering doing is opening a conversation with boards like CBSE and NIOS and all that to be able to use AAC as a device, as an accepted device, as an accepted accommodation for these board exams. I think one of the challenges is that if we don't have as many people, because we want more and more people to be using AAC devices, because we know that it's a beautiful support for children who have communication difficulties. We have been part of forums and discussions internationally where I've seen individuals, adults who have communication disabilities, and they are communicating beautifully their thoughts through AAC devices. And they are speakers at some of these events where they come and express their opinion through their AAC device. So unless our parents and families and caregivers are willing to accept this as an option for our children, and unless we have more and more users of AAC, we cannot really create awareness among schools about use of AAC. So I think we need to first create more awareness among the families about the use, and then think about pushing it also in schools. So if there is a child who is using AAC and is able to communicate through AAC, we would be glad to come and advocate for that child in that school to make room for that child to use AAC and communicate with their teachers and peers. And I think as a caregiver, you could also be the enabler. You could also be the advocate for your child, and we can also help in empowering you to do that.
Yeah, there is another question.
Is this the shadow teacher one?
I think you need to be a little more closer to the mic, I think, ma'am. I think your voice is still feeble. Sure. Is inclusion required throughout academic life if child fall under mild autism?
It is a very case dependent question. I will have to understand what do you mean? What is your child's need? What are your child's strengths and needs in order to answer that question? Because as I said, even this talk was a little difficult for me because I've never done this for a bigger group. I've always done it as an individual consult. So, excuse me, it was really difficult for me to come up with pointers that would help every family or every caregiver to support their children. So if you want to come back and talk to me, and I can help you with it. But is inclusion necessary? I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of cases where I have encouraged the families to move on from an inclusive school and go into maybe around like 13 or 14 years of age, because at that point, it is not necessarily about socialization. So up until that point, it was about socialization, being with children your age, being with children with different abilities, and socializing with them. But after a point, maybe, academics might take over as a priority. And at that point, you can shift your focus, and you can probably choose another school which might support your child better for his academic needs than the inclusion needs. So you could make that change at that point. Or there are families who choose to stay in the inclusive school and take care of the exam needs privately through an iOS or whatever. So there are a lot of different ways families approach it. So I can talk to you personally and support you with your specific needs.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's a series of questions from Ali. You can always unmute and ask questions directly. You don't need to always put in the chat. So what is your opinion on dependence on shadow teachers? How is the fading out of a shadow teacher determined by Insighte? I mean, Insighte is not a question here. So I think in regular, she would be giving an answer. Second thing is, please tell us a bit about NIOS curriculum. How does it accommodate mixed abilities in different subjects? For example, my child may be at his appropriate grade level for English, but maybe lagging in numeracy by 2 grade levels.
Hi, Bindiya ma'am. This is Ellie here. I asked these
Really?
2 questions.
Okay.
The first question is because you mentioned, I did a bit of research about your organization and you do supply shadow teachers.
Right.
Now, there is a school of thought which says that, you send the child to an inclusive environment and let him sort of accommodate picking up the right life skills, as he goes along. The other school of thought is providing a shadow teacher where the shadow teacher is there to make adjustments, make those crucial adjustments throughout the day. But there is also a flip side to having a shadow teacher where the child becomes too clingy and too dependent, and that self-efficacy that we want eventually doesn't develop. So how and when do we fade out shadow teachers is my question.
That is again a very case-dependent question. Because we will, like at Insight, at least, we are very careful about that because we understand the dependence that children develop on shadow teachers. And I think our teachers have also been very mindful of that, and they do a good job of letting go in areas where the child can manage on their own, and also giving the needed support when the child needs it. So I feel like our teachers do a pretty good job of that. Um, um, Weaning off of shadow teacher is a good question because I've seen a lot of children. Now, again, it depends on the child's level of functioning, that how soon the child is able to be independently functioning in a classroom without the support of a shadow teacher. We've had a very few cases where we've had the family decide that we don't need a shadow teacher anymore. In some cases, I also discourage having a shadow teacher. Like, say, for example, if the child is in 7th grade, 8th grade, and there are families who come and request for shadow teacher, and I say, no, I think you should reevaluate the situation, because that is the time when you are trying to fit in socially. I mean, it is adolescence and there's a lot of social pressure. And to have somebody who looks like a babysitter walking around with you in a classroom of that grade level is very stigmatizing for a child. So I encourage families to think about other options then. If it is younger than 5th grade, maybe we would still go with a shadow teacher. But for older kids, we would think about, okay, if you need a shadow teacher, which means this probably is not the right school for your child, we will have to think about a right school for your child. So that is how we would take the discussion at that point.
Thank you, ma'am. That helps a lot. Yeah.
Thanks. So you had one more question about NIOS curriculum.
Yeah.
So now let me tell you a little bit about NIOS, that as much as I know about NIOS. Now NIOS as a curriculum is not an easy curriculum. It is, I would say, it is as difficult as, say, your CBSE curriculum, for example. I've heard people say that the state syllabus is probably easier than NIOS. But then what is attractive about NIOS? NIOS is very flexible. Some of the flexibility features that they have. One is there are about 25 different subjects that you can choose from, I think, and you only have to choose 5 subjects, and the only condition there is one of which has to be a language. Only one of which has to be a language. Now, I think you could go and pick 5 languages and write papers on that and get your 10th degree. Or you could just pick English and 4 other subjects that your child is probably easier for your child to attempt. So there is this choice of subjects. There's that flexibility there where you can pick subjects that you want. So if you go to a CBSE school or an ICSE school, you would basically be forced to write the papers that they have determined as the core subjects for your 10th exam. So that would typically include English, math, science, social studies, Hindi, whatever, second language. That is not forced in NIOS. In NIOS, they give you a liberty to choose the subjects. That is one area of flexibility. A second is that you don't have to write all the subjects at the same time. So basically, once you hit 14 years, you turn 14 years of age, you're eligible to write 10th grade exam with NIOS. So you register as a 10th grade student and you start working towards it. You pick these 5 subjects that you want to do. They offer exams in October and April. So you can write one subject in October, two subjects in April, one subject again in October, another one subject in the following April. You can choose however you want to do it. Some children may even choose to do all 5 subjects at one go and finish it off. That is also possible. But when you're picking just one subject or 2 subjects at a time, in those 6 months or 5 months or whatever gap it is, they need to work on only those 2 subjects. And once they are done with that and they've cleared that, then they don't have to worry about these subjects. They can move on to their other subjects. So that is also helpful for our children. So that is also another attractive feature. So these are some of the flexibilities. Now, we've also seen that, even though there are a lot of accommodations like providing scribe, providing somebody to read out the questions to the child, providing, I don't know if additional time is one of the options. I think additional time is there in NIOS. But having said that, I don't think a lot of these accommodations are still accessible for a lot of our children. Like for a child with autism who is non-verbal, who uses an AAC, for example, to communicate, I'm not sure how they would accommodate for that child in an NIOS exam. So NIOS has its advantages and disadvantages. But if you are particular about doing it with CBSE, CBSE also has a lot of options. But the problem with CBSE is that this level of flexibility is not there. I think if I've understood it right, CBSE basically tells you to write the 5 core subjects that everybody is allowed to write, everybody is expected to write. Now, if you feel like one of these subjects is difficult for you, you can take another additional subject and write the paper. And if you score better in that subject, one of the subjects that you've scored low on can be replaced with that. Say, for example, you do your 5 core subjects and then you do, say, music, or you do home science or whatever other subjects in addition to them, so that one of these scores can be replaced by these supplementary subjects. So that would mean that a child with learning difficulties would have to learn more subjects than their regular peers and write exams for more number of subjects, which I think is unfair. So that way NIOS is more flexible and accessible to these children.
Thank you, ma'am. That really answers a lot of my questions. And I think the point about CBSE that you just made, we weren't aware of it. So that also
you might want to check into that. That is my understanding. I may be wrong on that, but that is my understanding from my interaction with some of the principals in these inclusive schools.
Okay, and just a bit about this whole presentation that you're making. We are truly grateful. I think the flow of the presentation was very clear, answered a lot of our questions, and also, clarified a lot of thinking processes. So thank you.
Thank you, Ali. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ali. So there's one more question from Harpreet. My son is mild autistic, was supposed to enter mainstream school last year, but due to pandemic, it could not be materialized. Though he is at par with his peers academically, but communication and social skills need to be worked upon. I am thinking of getting him to repeat the class. Is it a good idea?
Harpreet, a short answer to your question is not a good idea. I'm not a big fan of repeating classes. I believe that children should be in their age-appropriate class. As I said, the goal shouldn't be academic progress. The goal is inclusion, and they need to be included with their age-appropriate peers. Sometimes families choose to put a child in a lower grade because of the academic competence of the child, or sometimes the school also recommends that the child be admitted to a grade lower than what the child should actually go to for the same purpose. But what happens is, in the initial grades, it might look okay. Up until grade 5, it might look okay. But after that, if your child is older in this young class, then he might hit puberty sooner than the others would. He would stick out like a sore thumb. And I see that happening in a lot of cases where families have decided to put them in lower classes. So I think that is socially inappropriate, and it comes and it hits at an age where they start getting a lot more conscious about who they hang out with, or about their physique, or about their appearance and all that. So it hits them at the wrong time. And then the complications become a lot more to handle at that point. So I am not a fan of repeating a grade and or putting them in a grade that is lower than what they should be. And according to the Right to Education Act also, every child should be placed in their age appropriate classroom despite their ability.
My whole idea was that, like, academically, he's at par. So 1 year I'll be having to improve his social skills, communication skills, and he will be more confident. He won't lack his confidence. So I don't know.
But why would you want to put him in an academic environment that is boring for him?
Yeah. He knows everything. I get your.
So you might have to think differently there and see, maybe as I said earlier, try it out for a few years, and it is not guaranteed that they're going to pick up on these socialization skills, even if you put them in a lower grade. It's not guaranteed. Like somebody had mentioned, let them be in a regular school environment independently and let them figure it out. I think one of the difficulties that our children with special needs have is figuring things out on their own,
Yes.
especially when it comes to social skills. Now, our typically developing children would pick out their social cues and they will know what to say, what not to say in a group in order to be included. Our children don't have that acumen. That is one of their difficulties. So that is where they will need a lot more instruction and intervention and support, right? As you clearly said, academics is not the issue. Academics they'll pick up easily, but these other things they actually need support with. So even if you put them in a lower classroom, there is no guarantee that they will pick it up from there, themselves. You might have to do interventions to help them and to support them, right?
Okay.
Bindiya, this is Venkat here.
Yes,
See,
please.
my question is about, the assessing the readiness of the child to take, say, a secondary school examination, right? That is the first goal that most parents would have. How do I ensure my child crosses the secondary grade, right? Now, for that, what happens is if you look at a neurotypical curriculum that most of us have gone through, right? There, the assessment is, we know that, such and such standard, such and such stack ranking, some indicator will be there, right? Now, if I look at my children, right, I have twin kids, and if I have to, and both are on the autism spectrum. Now, after 8-9 months of pre-academic year, right, I kind of randomly ask them questions, right, to assess what they have learned in all these 6 months or 9 months or 1 year. Now, I have no way of knowing, right, whether they are ready to take the secondary school examination next year or the year after that or the year after that, because all that I get as feedback is, let's assess the readiness, right? So how do you get a ballpark estimate?
I have a very different way of looking at it, Venkat.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as I said earlier, what is your goal from schooling? Okay.
My goal
For
from
me,
let's have it interactive. My goal from schooling would be to get a certificate, so that using that certificate, I can look for productive employment opportunities.
That is a very appropriate goal for your child.
Right.
So what are you looking at there? You're just looking at the 10th degree.
Certificate, correct.
So for me, to get the 10th degree, if you need 20 marks on your written exam, that's all you need to make. I mean, this is not the right way of looking at it, but if you look at it, even our neurotypical children are doing the same thing. What are they doing? They're not learning. They're learning to take a test.
They're learning to
take a test. If you look at your 10th grade coaching classes or 10th grade school classes in any school for that matter, all they are doing is training the children to test. How do you tackle a CBSE test? After that, when they go for their coaching for NEET or whatever, they're teaching the same thing. They're not focusing on learning. So why can't we do the same thing? So to me, if they can tackle the test and get those 20 marks to pass, that's all it matters.
So see, if you take a very broad perspective of that, Bindiya, right? Whatever you focus on, right? That's what we say in corporates also. You want to run this business unit, you focus on that, because focus and paying attention provides results, right? Now, that's a very broad perspective. Now, that perspective applies to everything, whether to NEET or JEE or whether it is to this class. So broadly, again, as someone was saying, right? Now, if I can focus my child to do it in a special school setting or an alternative school setting, I can focus my child to do in a regular school setting as well, right? Then why gradation, differentiation? Why are we giving? I feel that we are giving a lot of leeway to our children rather than stretching them. It's my personal opinion. My wife may disagree with me, right? But my personal opinion is that everybody, every sentient being has got a potential, and it is in us to stretch that to the limit. I think we are not doing that by bringing in some other logic and saying that there's this whole theme of identifying schools, right? I mean, again, I would say that each school is different within the so-called alternative or special
Definitely,
schools, right?
definitely.
Right. So where do you draw the line?
I agree with you, Venkat, on not pushing enough, not pushing our children enough.
Correct,
right?
correct.
But let me tell you, what are we pushing them on? We're pushing them on our goals. Right? So when we say we are not pushing them enough, what are we pushing them on? Like, let's take an example of a child with a specific learning disability, like a math disability, for example, who's going to regular school. And we're saying, why are we making leeways for this child? We are not pushing him enough. What are we pushing him on? We're pushing him on something that has been decided for him. We are saying that you have to take an exam in English, math, science, social studies, and Hindi in order for you to pass this 10th. Now, if I had said that, I want you to take an English, math, science, Hindi, and an exam on creative writing. I'm telling you, one of your daughters would do extremely well on that. But that is not what we are giving there. That is not the opportunity we are giving there. We have created this square box. And we are telling, if you're not doing enough, you're not trying enough, that means you are a failure. And we need to push you to meet the expectations of that box. But what NIOS is doing is, you take whatever your child can do and make them do well in that. Right? So for me, it is not about pushing the child. If you take the right goal for your child, you push them in that, the child will get it. The child will do also. But it has to be a goal that is an appropriate goal for the child.
It's like a catch-22 situation, because unless you push on everything, like in a neurotypical environment, English and math are very necessary for survival in the real world, for banking, for transactions, for commercial purposes, business, for everything. English and math, these two are very essential, right? So
do you think 10th grade math is essential? I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Okay. 10th grade maths may not be essential.
Not be. Up until 5th grade, whatever you get is enough for you to do or whatever you just said.
Yeah, I think Venkat, I would be the right person to answer that question.
Yeah, please, Mithun.
So I am somebody
who is speaking?
my name is Mithun. My name is Mithun.
Okay, Mithun, hi.
Yeah. So hi Venkat. So I mean, I'm just taking the question that you put in the context. So I am somebody who has ADHD with slight LD. Okay. So consider that I have just managed to pass the 10th standard maths, and I worked for banking in 6 years. And I never found trigonometry or geometry or any of those things being used anywhere in my life. All that I required was addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, just done by 5th standard. Right? And more than that, I probably would need to learn how to use an Excel or some calculator. End of story. So basically, what you learn from school, say 8, 9, 10, and what is a part of the curriculum is not essential to be part of you. But if people push me to learn that trigonometry or geometry, I would have struggled in my life because I would have never been able to understand those concepts.
Right.
So that's the perspective I think she was trying to put out there.
Maybe you should tell him how many businesses you run now, Mithun.
Yeah.
So it is not about. So I think our definition of successes also should be revisited, right? When we talk about getting good grades in those predetermined subjects, if the subjects are changed, I may get better grades because if it's a subject of my interest, I will get better grades for you. But it is those predetermined subjects that we are asked to. Like I always tell my teachers, have you heard of something called a dance disability? You will not hear of a dance disability. I believe I have a music disability, but it will never be recognized as a disability. Why? Because CBSE or ICSE or nobody asks you to get your 10th exam, 10th pass certificate based on an exam on music.
Correct.
But only because they have decided these are the 5 subjects you're going to do and you're going to get good marks on to get the certificate. And if I'm not good in one of the subjects, you say I'm a failure. I'm sorry, it's very difficult for me to accept that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is all what NIOS is giving. I think NIOS is doing a good job. I mean, again, you are given only a choice of 25 subjects.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah,
But you're still given a choice of 25 subjects.
fair. Okay. All right.
Madam, this is Adish.
Yes, Adish.
So you talked about the inclusion, and how you see inclusion as, which is very, very good perspective. What do you see inclusion when you have, when the child exhibit behavioral issues, which in all fairness, I sometimes agree with the school also struggle. And similarly, as a parent, we also, want the child to be included. Okay. So what, is there a solution to this, or homeschooling is the only solution?
There is no one solution to it. Now, remember in that visuals that I showed, there were these 3 visuals down, and there's that one visual, the ideal, the inclusion that we are looking for. Now, that inclusion, it still remains an ideal, because if our inclusion to happen, it's not just the child who needs to change. We always make the child change. We always put all our blame and all the faults, everything is on the child. And the child is expected to change when we as adults are not able to make a small change to accommodate this child. So for inclusion to happen, the whole system has to start accommodating for the child. Only then there will be inclusion. So in fact, I'll tell you an example of, there are a lot of schools that, that when they face behavioral difficulties, the first thing they do is they call the parents. They call the parents. I don't know why they do that. They call the parents. The parents are asked to do something about it. And, parents are like, sometimes this doesn't happen at my house. But it happens at school. So you probably have to do something about it. Take him to behavior therapy, get him fixed and bring him back. But what you don't realize is a behavior happens only when it is triggered. And a trigger for a behavior is in the environment the child is in. So when the behavior is happening in the school environment and you are asked to take the child outside to behavior therapy, your behavior therapy environment is completely different from your school environment. And probably the triggers that are there in the school environment is not in that behavior therapy environment. So a behavior therapist who's working with him one-on-one, who's the sweetest person in the world, who makes good friendship with him, and he loves that lady, he will do well in that session. And when the therapist decides that he's done now, he's good, so you can please take him back to the school, he comes back to the school, the triggers are still there, and he starts showing the same behaviors. So the behavioral issues especially is something that has to be dealt with in the school environment. And in the schools that I go to consult, the first thing I tell them, I remember the school that I have been consulting for the past 4 or 5 years now. I remember my first meeting with the counselor there, and she said, we have these children who are having behavioral issues, and we've called the parents. And I asked, why? What will the parents do? Because if it is a teacher who doesn't know how to accommodate for this child, if it is a teacher who is being very mean to this child, and if that is the reason why this child is having behavior problems, what is the parent going to do about it? So especially for behavior regulation issues, the solution has to come from within the environment. As a parent, there is nothing much you can do about it. If the school does not have the appropriate level of support, I would say you look for another school. In the school that I have been working in, behavioral difficulties is a consistent, is an area that needs consistent support. Like today you may have one guy who's doing something, tomorrow you may have something else. But these two things might have to be dealt with in a different way. And one might be by pulling the child out of the class, or one might be by talking to the teacher and giving her strategies to use in the class. It is a very dynamic process. I mean, you need to understand where the things are going wrong and what is happening for the child to do that behavior in order to figure out a solution for it. So I don't know how to answer your question, but the short answer for that is the solution has to come from that environment, which is not there in a lot of schools. So when the school is not able to provide that support, that is when they are outsourcing it. They want somebody else, a shadow teacher, to come and do it. Even though I I consult for Insight as a supervisor and as a trainer for the shadow teachers at Insight. In the schools that I consult, I discourage the culture of using a shadow because of all the other reasons that someone else had pointed out, the dependency, the whole idea of exclusion by having one person being with you. So for various reasons, I discourage. I have families who come and ask me, should we get a shadow? And we say, no, we are equipped to support your child even without a shadow. So please let the child come to school. Now, it is very challenging. It's extremely challenging. If you don't have the right resource in the school, it is extremely challenging. But I've been fortunate to have the right resources in that school, and we've had teachers who have dealt with these situations pretty well. But as I said, sometimes the solution would be segregation. Sometimes the solution would be integration. I mean, there could be a lot of different ways to deal with that particular difficulty of that particular child. It might have to be one of those different arrangements on that spectrum, or it could be a combination of different arrangements on that spectrum. But it has to come from the school. There's nothing much you can do about it.
Where is that school, madam? We have seen, we have not seen one. Okay, we lived 16 years in the UK. We have not seen there. We thought we'll explore India and come back. Okay, right. So, I have not seen one yet.
Right.
And always the fault is child. And
yeah,
as you rightly said, that's how the world sees.
Yes.
And that's the society today.
Ma'am, aren't special schools better then? At least they understand your child.
It's again the perspective, right? I still think special school is exclusionary.
Ma'am, I
still
had one
want
question,
inclusion to
ma'am.
happen. Yes, Deepa.
Yeah, ma'am, as far as Harpreet told about special schools, there are parents who have told me that special schools, the kid will have more behavior problems because they adapt from the kid who is having more behavior challenges. If that happens, then as a parent, it's a very difficult situation that what to choose, what not
To
to.
counter your point, Deepa, if you think that way, I mean, that is not the reason why I wouldn't send a child to a special school. Because if you were to think in that from that point of view, then a special child should not be accommodated in a regular school, right? Because all the other parents would have a problem with it. What if the other children learn from this special child's behaviors? That is an argument they can
Ma'am,
also say.
that happens, ma'am.
It does.
Yeah,
And
it
for
does
me,
happen.
that
Yes.
is also something I fight in these schools. You know, the
Like,
the parents of regular children's attitude is also another thing that we fight for in the school. So what I'm saying is, you know, when we are at the receiving end, we think of it differently, and when we are at the giving end, we think of it differently. You know, so I think when we think like that for a special school, we should be thinking like that from the perspective of a regular child's parent also. But the point is, for me, a special school is about exclusion. You know, the child is in an artificially created environment, and that is not going to be his society when he grows up. We want him to be a functioning, active part of the mainstream society. But for that, the society should be ready for it to begin with. I think we have been a culture where our children with disabilities have always been hidden. They've never been brought out, like, you know, historically, like, you know, probably the generations before us. In some cases, some families never even disclosed that they had a child with special needs. They were hidden at their homes. And now when all of these children have come out now because of inclusion and they're coming out, the infrastructure is not ready to support them. People are not ready to support them. Like, I know my parents and my my family from that generation, how they look at the child with special needs. It's always sympathy, it's always pity, and I do not like that, because the moment you have pity and sympathy, you cannot include someone. You can only provide for them. You cannot include them and consider them as just a human being like us, who has so much more to offer. That is inclusion. So for inclusion to happen, the society and the mainstream society should be ready for it. Not just the child who is being included or the individual who is being included. The entire society should be ready for it. How can we make that happen?
as far as
Long drawn
society,
process.
ma'am, as far as society is concerned, I still have parents who have a notion that after 1 to 2 years the child will be normal.
Right.
They still have this. After
Right.
the OT and the ST and the BT, everything will be okay. And this is just one phase of life which is going to get over.
Right.
So,
Ma'am,
and the parents are not ready to accept, ma'am. The society
It's
will
very
take a
difficult.
lot of
It's
time.
very difficult. Yeah.
ma'am, I am in Ludhiana, and hardly you have any school here which has inclusion for autistic children. So I spoke to the principal the other day, and she was like, "You will have to tell us what all provisions we need to make for the child, not dictating all the provisions, because I myself am not experienced. How do I dictate it to them? Like what all you
See,
do?"
I think for you, maybe a good start would be having a shadow.
Okay.
So sometimes, you could be that change, and your child could be the pioneer there. He goes into a school maybe with a shadow who's well trained, by the way, who knows what she's supposed to do. And when they start seeing that, okay, it's not that big of a deal to include a child who's different, right? So maybe we can try another child. Maybe we can try another two children. I mean, it could happen, right? That is how you create that ripple. But that's the only way you can do it, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Bindiya. Sorry to interject, but even I was thinking loud when this question came, right? So we parents, if setup is already in place, right, then nothing like it. But then if it is not there, what do you do?
What do you do?
Either you create it or somebody else already has for you, right? There are only two options in any circumstances.
Correct.
Even in work, right? Either you do it or your subordinate does it, right? So
Right.
there are only two ways. Either you do it or somebody else does it. Now, the problem for most of us is that we have limitations in our time and bandwidth dealing with children. And for us to kind of go that stretch and create something, and if we have to assess the state of schools, alternate schools in India, right? Where are really the options? I can also go on a victim mode, or I can go on a complaint mode. And then I know the obvious answer. The obvious answer is, again, you are going to come and say, make do with whatever is available.
Right.
Right. And unfortunately, whatever is available is so little. Whatever is available. So at the end of the day, like somebody else said, it's the child. Whether you call it the blame or whether you call it, the child's state or whatever, right? So ultimately, everything goes to the child.
Correct.
Thank you.
So right, you're right, Venkat. I think, Harpreet, you should be that change.
Ma'am, can you guide us? Like your organization, does it guide parents how to help school?
We can actually. We have been thinking about doing the same thing with.
Because ma'am, there are many
Right
states
also.
in India which do not have, and as parents, we do need support because we haven't done it before.
So we've been thinking about doing this for other cities also, where parents are struggling like this. The important thing is for the teachers to be supervised, the teachers to be trained properly. And that is something, at Insight, we've also been thinking if we can do this for other families in other
That would be
cities.
really nice, ma'am, because all over India you hardly have such provisions, and moving abroad is not the solution.
And it's not like if you move abroad also, it's
Yes.
the picture is very rosy, like Adish
just
pointed
running
out.
away. That's it.
It's
I
not.
agree. But ma'am,
There are systems in place. It might be easier for you to find a placement for your child. But even if you find a placement, it's not like everything is going to be rosy in that placement.
I understand, ma'am. We have to crave away for our children, but we need support.
Right.
And there's one question I think we missed in between.
Okay.
I think it was by Shruti.
Hi, I can ask myself.
Sure.
Yeah. Hi, Bindiya ma'am. My question is, if a child is there in the classroom with a shadow, how does the socialization really happen? Like, how do the other children treat the child in a regular classroom with a shadow nearby? And like, apart from, I know the shadow teaches the child to say, greet their peers and say hello and remember their name. But apart from that, does any other socialization really happen? Some other socialization goals can you share which the shadow has?
I have a lot of my support teachers in this meeting right now. Would any of you like to take that question?
Aparna, do you want to answer that?
I can start answering it, and maybe others can pitch in if they have anything to add. So again, all our shadows do it very differently based on what the child's needs are. Sometimes the child is only ready to initiate a conversation. So the goal would be just initiating, just the child will say hi in every session during the online session. In every class, child will say at least hi to at least one child in the class, something like that. But there may be others who are ready to do a lot more, like, in fact, play with other children during our pre-COVID times. So then they would facilitate that. So our shadow teachers who have been very, they evaluate the child's readiness for doing different skills, and they have facilitated those skills for that particular child. Now, how do other children look at them? Now, those also our shadow teachers have played it differently in different situations. There are some teachers who are made a part of the classroom, where the class teacher is also open to that, where this teacher works as a support for any child who needs her. So she is not necessarily associated with this particular child. Anybody who needs help, she will go around and support them. So that way, other children don't necessarily see her as this person's person or this child's person, right? There are some teachers who've realized that the child is able to do a lot of things independently. They would let them be in their seat and do those work while the support teacher sits in the back of the class, and she will only come and support him whenever he needs, or may come and whisper something in his ear to calm him down. Or there are times when that child needs more help, he'll go and sit with her. So there are a lot of different ways in which our teachers have dealt with situations. So if there's anybody else who want to add to it, I'd like to.
Just one question I have to add to it. Like, how does the shadow respond? Like, if the other children ask, like, why you have someone sitting near you, how does the shadow respond, or how do you teach the child to respond?
So it is, again, as I said, it is not the child's responsibility to do that. It should be an adult's responsibility. So a shadow can do that. But again, if the shadow is doing it, the shadow is not necessarily helping the situation. I have teachers who come and tell me, ma'am, I'm trying to make my class inclusive, but there are some children who are very mean. They will treat the child with special needs differently, or they'll say, oh, she's coming, she's drooling, or I don't want him here, ma'am, he'll disturb us, things like that. And they ask me, what do I do? And I say, sorry, I lost my thought. And I tell them, see, you are the adult in the classroom. Whatever you model as an adult is what your children will also do. Because children, they imitate what they see. They don't listen to lectures. You can't lecture them, hey, no, Priya, you shouldn't be doing like that to so-and-so. That is not nice. That is not what they respond to. They learn from how you treat that child. So as a teacher, how do you treat that child, and how do you treat that shadow in your class? That is how the rest of the class will treat that child and shadow. If the teacher is dismissive of the child, and if the teacher keeps saying, hey, Aparna, just take care of that child. See, she's not sitting in the seat, please. If she keeps doing that, then the children start thinking, oh, Aparna ma'am is that child's person. On the other hand, if the class teacher is good at including this child and making sure that this child is part of everything that we do, and keeps praising this child or keeps giving positive feedback to this child, everybody else will start doing that. So I think that onus should not be on the child, it should be on the adults in the environment. But I don't know how many adults are actually ready to do that.
Ma'am, sorry to
go ahead.
Actually, sorry, I wasn't around when my name was called. I was a little busy, but I'd be happy to share my experience as a shadow if any question was directed. So, was there any specific issue that they had in mind, or do you just want to hear about?
Shruti wanted to know, when children come and ask you who you are in the classroom, how is it that you respond? So, how are you related to this child or whatever?
Okay. So what's happened is, until now, because of the lockdown, they've had online classes, right? So they haven't really had a chance to interact with each other or with me along with my client. So we usually see each other on video, but because they see me sitting next to him, sometimes they ask, who is that? Is that your parent or your cousin? Some of them have asked, and I've just told them I'm his teacher. And I tell them that sometimes he needs a little bit of help with doing things faster or understanding things. So that's when he comes to me, and whatever questions he has, I help him out with those questions. So then they understand, and after that, they haven't really asked much. So only a few curious students asked, okay. Some of them asked, like, why do you need another teacher? We already have one. So yeah, why do you need? Because I'm sure children must be feeling, why does he get an extra teacher and why don't we, But the good thing about Indus is what they've done in the classroom. So he goes to Indus, and they have kind of prepped the children already while he joined the grade. So the children are kind of aware of my kid, and he's on the mild autism spectrum. So they know that, okay, I mean, they might not understand what exactly it is, but they know that he needs a little bit of help. So they kind of make space for him that way. So they're not mean, or they don't make fun of him, or they just kind of, they think he's like this funny kid, and they just kind of accommodate him in the class with everybody else. So, yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
So like,
sorry.
Hi, Yasmin. Yeah, hi.
Hi, guys. How are you guys doing? Can you
Very good,
hear
very
me?
good. Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. I'm Yasmin. I just wanted to add to it. When it comes to shadow teachers, I just wanted to mention about, especially to Shruti, who asked the question, because I have a son who has had a shadow for a little short than 1.5 years in total. In schools like Indus, it works to some extent if really the teacher is open to the idea and is really open to the idea of having someone in the class where the teacher will put some more effort and will include the child, like Ms. Bindiya said. But we've had issues with some teachers where that was not happening too good. And the stigmatization started happening from grade 6 onwards, where I feel that is the age where a shadow should really start weaning off and not be around the child too much. In my case, I was lucky because I had a shadow who looked so young. She almost looked like one of the students. And it kind of worked well, and the way she put herself into the group. But it always depends on the teacher, unfortunately, because there is still not enough training given. And it always depends also on the shadow teacher. So that was my experience. I just wanted to share.
Thank you, Yasmin, for that.
No problem.
Thank you, Yasmin.
That's all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Is there any? I think there's one last question. I think we'll probably take it up and then we can, wind it up. So I think it's from Samira. My son would be going to the class 10 this year. He's dyslexic. It's very difficult for him. Samira, if you're there, could you briefly tell what is the difficulty he's facing or something, so that we better understand the question?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, Samira. Please go ahead.
Okay, hi. I'm sorry I logged in very late, but actually my son is in class 10 and he had been diagnosed dyslexic when he was in class 1. And then we did do some special schooling and all for him and got him on track. And then finally, then like we put him into an inclusive school, the KV. The KVs, they takes children like this. Till now, we've been able to manage well. But plus he has a neurological disorder as well. As in, it's not a disorder, but it's affected his right side. So the writing is affected. So he writes very slow. Okay. And then, I mean, mentally, otherwise he's absolutely fine. But then, of course, being a dyslexic child, absorbing so much of information, from all the subjects. There are so many subjects with so many chapters. So it's like difficult for him to reproduce it, on paper. So thankfully, thanks to the coronavirus, this year we've sort of managed, because of the Google Classrooms and the Google papers and all. But this year now they are going to be doing offline exams. So like for maths and all, जैसे maths ही है अगर, तो there are so many formulas in it, and it's very confusing for him. It's very difficult. And we went to the school. so they don't have much provision. And basically, there is no provision in schools in India, actually. They were telling me maximum what we can do is get him a scribe, or maximum, this and that. But the 5 subjects he will have to give. So, I mean, as a parent, it's torture to see your child, go through that. And but then you have to pass class 10. That is another factor. So I was wondering, I mean, how to go about it, basically. What do I do to help him,
Samira, actually, there are a lot of ways that you can do that. I mean, I think at this point, I would like also to bring up the concept of disability certificate and the provisions that would provide for a child who has difficulties in learning. It might be a good idea for all of us to have a documentation like that, because that would definitely help later on when the child is ready for a board exam. Because that is what will help you get the support that you need for the child even while writing the exam. Now, Samira, does your child go to a CBSE school? Or KV should be a CBSE school?
Yeah, it's CBSE.
So CBSE does offer these accommodations for exams, but I'm not sure if you were here when I talked about that earlier. When you don't, gosh, I lost my train of thought. See, in CBSE, the accommodations are that you have to do the 5 subjects, that is the core subject. And if you're weak in any one of those, you can write additional papers to substitute your scores of those weak subjects.
Yeah.
So which means if your child has a difficulty in learning, you are expected to learn more than 5 subjects, when the other typically developing children only have to learn 5 subjects and write exams for that. So that is how CBSE does it. Now, as you have been informed, there is a provision of scribe, there's provisions for extra additional time, there is provision for typing your answers. Those are all provisions that maybe your child would be able to access. Now, if you are not happy with whatever CBSE has to offer, then NIOS is also an option. Now, if you have missed all that, I think Mithun might be sharing the recording of this session. You could probably go back and look at it, or you can even reach out to us for, individualized recommendations for your child.
Yes, ma'am. If I could have your number, that will be really nice.
Sure. That is, I think it's already given.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Samira.
Right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Because I'm really losing out on it. When we sit and like the other day we were doing maths, and when the basic,
painful.
It's just really, for that one sum we sat for 1.5 hours, and then it all ended up in me getting all, hyper. And I know it's not his fault. I know, but then I also know that he has to do it.
Right.
It has to be done. Staying here, we have no other option. So, it just gets very difficult. And then the science is so difficult with the chemistry and the physics. Ek baar ko theory, if I can still get through with the theory, the numericals, it's just so difficult, my God.
Where do you live, Samira?
Right now, actually, my husband's in the Indian Coast Guard. Okay. So right now we are posted in a very remote area called Mandapam. I don't know if you know Rameshwaram.
Yes.
Yeah, it's near that.
Okay.
So...
yeah, so the supports also would be limited.
Yes, there is no support, basically. So like when I went to speak with the principal, because Hindi is very bad with him. Hindi is something we cannot manage, because spoken language, of course, we are Hindi speaking people, but you know how it is, it's very difficult otherwise, writing and everything. So they said, dena to hai, you have to give the paper now. So see, when he has to go and give the paper, he cannot leave it blank, right? So he has to know something to write in that.
Well, let's talk offline. I'll definitely touch base.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really need help right now.
Yeah. I think there is one question that I think we missed out in between, and I think I sent you in chat also, Bindiya ma'am. So this is on Bindu. Please share your opinion on homeschooling of minimally verbal children. Maybe enrolling them in some sports or art class or socializing would help, since they miss out on being in the classroom. Probably I think the question is how to, if they're homeschooled, how can they bridge the gap between regular schooling and...
I'm not really sure about the supports for homeschooling that is available. Mithun, you have some information, you can share it here, because I know in like in the West and all, in the US and all, I've seen there are groups of families who do homeschooling and they support each other. They have they do physical education and all the other things that is being done in regular schools. They do it as part of their group. They bring their children together and they engage in all these activities. And I think there are groups that are developing in India also along similar lines, because there are so many more families who are opting for homeschooling now. But I wouldn't be able to tell you the right resources and where to guide you to, or where to connect you to. But I'm pretty sure I've heard of, but I don't know how well they are being conducted, how organized they are. I'm not sure of all that. But I do know there are people who are catering to the needs of homeschooling families. Mithun, would you be able to, do you know of any groups like that?
Yeah, I think I would be able to share a few contacts. I'll take her contact and share it to her.
Yes, yes.
Kindly
Sorry,
drop me
Bindu,
a
I
DM.
could not be of more help with that question, but maybe you can reach out to these groups and see how they can help.
I think there is one last question. I think she's asking whether a special school can be a good bridge school before we put them in a mainstream school.
What are you trying to bridge?
Harpreet, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah. Ma'am, actually, I came across a special school. They were like, we have an inclusion classroom where we actually train the kids how they have to be in the main school, how to, they know the basic social cues, how to make a line, how to sit together, how to wait for your turn. And then we put them in the mainstream school.
Mainstreams. That sounds like a good idea. I mean, if you know, if that is something that you have access to, I'm not sure how well it will work, because it is again being trained in a very protected, segregated environment. When you go to a regular school, he might know the conventions, but the way it is done there would be very different,
Yes.
right? Our children, I've seen the difference when, you know, when children with special needs play and when children who are typically developing children play. It's very different. I mean, a typically developing group of children playing together, such cutthroat competition, right? You know, and they're all ready to face that competition also. And when we have one of our kids come in there, they just find it very hard to fit in, no matter how much social skills training or therapy or whatever you've given outside. When we come here, it's a different world. For them to get in, it's really hard. So when you go into a regular school environment, it might be a little bit more challenging. But if this bridge school is doing what they're doing, they probably have experience and they've done it before and they probably know better. So I think there's no harm in trying that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Area.
Yeah, Chitra, I think we have one parent here, so I would probably want her inputs as well. So
Please.
Chitra, would you want to share probably on your journey in terms of school inclusion or something?
Okay. I don't know because this was popped on suddenly on me. I'm just going to say one thing that like we had a very unconventional journey, and I always keep referring to my son being a change maker, because when we started out, the school was just starting out and there were no support systems in place. But our focus was very clear. It is only for social interaction opportunities. It was not at all about academics. And at that point, I didn't realize it, but much later I did realize that that worked. And the school was very supportive. And as a parent, something that I have constantly done is I have I call them diplomacy skills. I have been the one who is coordinated between the school and the needs of my child. So like coordinated, advocated, you can call it whatever you say. And also like not to get lost in the small things, in the nitty gritties, because sometimes some things don't actually matter too much in the long run. The gains are much bigger, like in other areas. So like I've shut my eyes to a lot, not a lot of things, some things which which could have irritated me and really taken me off track. But it has benefited. It has benefited my son. And sorry, I didn't give any details about my son. My son is a minimally verbal child on the spectrum, and he is currently attending grade 8 in a mainstream school in Bangalore. And so the school has been hugely supportive because I felt like what I've understood is it was from the management and the principal. The principal was clear about what inclusion was for her, and it's a top-down thing. So if the people at the top are clear, it just goes down. But if it's that the clarity is not there, I just remember Bindiya actually mentioning in one of the slides. So if that clarity is not there at the management and the principal level, I wouldn't suggest you go for for that particular school. So, and how open are they about talking about inclusion? Because many schools say they are inclusive, but then they're not comfortable being open about the inclusion they practice. For example, they may not put it up on their websites, or frankly, I know of schools where the resource room and all the settings are in the basement, which no, that is not inclusion. Inclusion is when the child is in the classroom and the child is supported to be whoever he or she is, like despite all the issues. And that is what my son is like. I remember somebody asking about what do you tell the other children, something like that. Yeah, so I'll just share something. There were children like my son, he takes in an iPad. So he does his work on the iPad, and now he's transitioned into a laptop, and he uses that for communication also. So initially it was a point of attraction for the other children, as it is for any child. And slowly they were made to understand that this is my son's need. So if without it, he will not be able to be in the class with them. And they accepted it. And they also had questions like, why doesn't my son talk? Like that question has been addressed to me directly. And I just had to openly explain it to them. And I had the best peer buddies I could find, just because I explained to them that he has some issues and he needs your support. And he's always had peer buddies, because we've been very open about his difficulties. The teachers have been open. And so I can go on and on and on about my experience, because it's a 10-year-long journey. But I don't know. Is there anything else, Bindiya, that you want me to share?
No, I think what you can, okay, Bindiya, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to ask if anybody has anything specific to ask Chitra. Because as Chitra said, hers has been a very unconventional journey, and she's been fortunate to have those teachers who she's had and who supported them all along. And they are the ones who facilitated inclusion. Unless, it comes from an adult, and like as Chitra answered the questions of these children, right, very openly. I mean, there is nothing to be ashamed of or to hide. When children understand, when you tell them they understand, they will ask you questions. If they get it, then that's it. They will go along with it. So I think there have been a lot of adults in Chitra's son's life including Chitra, who has facilitated inclusion for him. So yeah, we're very happy for him for that.
Yeah, I think somebody asked which school it is. I think Chitra, you can share it. I mean, there's no big deal.
Yeah, I don't have an issue. It's Vaidehi School of Excellence in Bangalore. So they have a very different philosophy of inclusion. So yeah, and it's worked, and I hope it continues also. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other school that Bindiya was referring to was the Cambridge International School.
Yeah.
PCIS, where she's working as a consultant in inclusion. So I mean, none of these innovations like private information. Some people are like asking, can you share the school name and all? I shared the contact in the chat. So thanks a lot for everyone for taking your time and coming. I'm really glad that we could hear so many diverse voices, not just from the speaker, but from parent, from even from father side, mother side, from all the angles.
Sorry, can I? Sorry, just very quick. I didn't understand the school name. Sorry, which school was it, Chitra?
Vaidehi School of Excellence in Whitefield, Bangalore.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Never heard of it. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Mithun, I just want to add one more
Go ahead.
point actually. I would tell parents also reach out to the parents of other neurotypical children, because as parents of children with special needs, we always hesitate. We think that all the other people are somehow going to come to for our throats, but it's not. I've had some wonderful parents who initially were hesitant because they didn't know what to do, but they had that intent, and you will always find such good parents and good teachers. So if you find such a parent or a teacher, cling on to them for life, and make them part of your circle, because that helps a lot in your whole journey. Sorry.
Thanks a lot for the tip. I think that's a very, very clear point. Another thing, I felt from my personal experience is that you have to empower the child to say what he needs, right? If he wants to sleep in the class, the child should be able to say it. He doesn't have to hide anything that he requires. He can go tell, I want to sleep in the class. I cannot focus more than 10 minutes. I want to sleep after 10 minutes. And he would be able to say, I want to go out of the class. I'm not able to attend the class more than 15, 20 minutes, which kind of empowers him to ask for what he needs. And that also builds a good communication between whoever is in the class. It can be the peers, it can be with the teacher, or whoever it is. If that thing the child can do, then you don't need a shadow. You don't need anybody, even the system is not required, because he's able to stand for himself and represent them, right? So I think that is something you need to inculcate in a child, saying these are the areas that if you feel any requirement, feel free to tell to the people, and tell them that is a need. There is a reason why you would need that particular gap or particular accommodation or something. So that you don't need another person to come and talk to them. Because at the end of the day, when they become adults, they need to stand up and say, this is what I need to do, right? I stopped writing notes at 8th standard. I just told the teacher that I don't understand anything that I write, so it's better for me to just sleep in the class. Or I will just listen to whatever you say and I will just go home. But I can't write the notes. But there were like maths teachers who were like, how can somebody learn maths without writing maths? I said, I'm not able to understand whatever I am writing, right? I would probably look at some other way or practice at home or something, I'll figure it out. But I'm not able to write or follow the speed at which you are teaching me in the class. So I guess these are like some of the things that I was able to voice out. So there was no confrontation between the teacher or me, right? They understood that I am not going to do it. So I guess that's a very key skill to have as well.
Yeah, I agree wholly with Mithun, because that is again something I keep telling my son also, because he can't sit for a 45-minute class without taking a break to walk around, or like maybe stim, or he can get mentally exhausted. So I've literally told him, if you're feeling tired, you can put your head down and take a short nap. Nobody is going to bother you. I will speak to the teacher concerned. So, and he does that. He takes those breaks, and the school has adapted around him. So, like, he doesn't put it in so many words, but he just exerts it, his right. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chitra. Bindiya, any notes, any closing notes?
I think I'm done. I'm glad that we had a wonderful participation today, and it has been interactive the way I wanted it to be. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. So we'll be sending a mail with, I think there's an inclusion checklist some of our interns have created. So we'll be sending that to all the parents who have attended the webinar. I think it will be shared through mail. The recording will be on the Insighte YouTube channel. That will also be shared in the mail. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for taking your time on a Saturday evening and being here.
Thank you guys also.
Thank you, Asmin.
Bye.
Bye.